G'day everyone, Glenn from Fat Glenn's Fish. Happy New Year, 1st of January today down here in Hobart. Today's little video, quick one on how I do brine shrimp. Something very useful to the hobby. I'm coming at it from the value point of view, big room. Hope you enjoy. One of the main reasons we feed brine shrimp is what we're looking at here. There's a lot of beautiful little baby fish here that, between you and me, are probably worth about $30 each if you grow them out. Baby brine is a fantastic starter because it's live. It attracts the attention of new fish that are doing everything on instinct. Setting up for brine shrimp can seem a bit daunting in terms of cost and the amount of equipment. Stick around to the end and I'll do a breakdown of how cheap it actually works out. So this is one of the reasons I'm putting the batch of brine on. I've had a couple of recent spawns in the shell dweller department. What we're looking at here is some baby sunspot brevis, and I want to give them a kickstart, and I don't think you can go past the live brine for this. Next door we've also had a spawn of the heckwi, and once again these little guys are going to do real well on a squirt or two of brine shrimp every other day. That's not to say that it has no value for the parents. There's not much that doesn't love nice fresh brine. So a couple of the key things to consider when doing brine shrimp. First and foremost, the quality of the cyst you're going to use. This is American 1 pound tin of Artemia cysts from the Great Salt Lakes region of Utah or wherever that is over there. I buy this from a company called Primo Aquaculture, although I'm going to have to review that because you used to be able to buy an individual tin. They now insist on you buying 12 tins, and about $120 a tin. Buying 12 in one go is a challenge. Not for me right at the moment. You want to keep this in dry, clean environment, reasonably cool. I put it up the other end of the shed underneath the shelf, and it comes with a silica gel sachet to keep it dry, and this pretty cool little double-ended half or full teaspoon for measuring out when you're making up a batch. The other thing to be mindful of, these cysts are what they call decapsulated, which means that they've been pre-treated with an acid wash, I believe, which thins down the shell on the Artemia cyst, which gives them the benefit of a much quicker hatch rate. Now, in nature, these little things are laid and they float to the surface, they blow across the lake onto the shores, they dry out when the water recedes and lie there dormant for the next wet season. To hatch those from scratch, it might take 2 or 3 days by the time they reabsorb water. This decapsulation process speeds things up incredibly. I'll put this batch on tonight at about 5 PM my time, and they'll be ready to feed tomorrow morning. So without giving you too much of my life story, I was born in Geelong in Victoria many years ago, and one of the things you notice about your local area is certain industries and landmarks. And one of the things that I used to often see when my dad used to take me out fishing out of St Leonard's was
the salt pans at a place called Moolap. There's a company to this day which still harvests salt out of Geelong called Cheetham Salt Enterprises, I believe. I'll put a link up in the video. 10 or 12 years ago, when I was starting to hatch out brine shrimp and use salt for various things, it just came back to me as a bit of a flash. I looked it up in the yellow pages. Sure enough, it's still there. I rang the number to talk to someone in the sales department, and I explained my interest and what I was looking for, and they graciously recommended a product which, if you're going to use any sort of salt in your hobby ongoing, I strongly recommend you do. It's going to save you a lot of money. The Cheetham company market salt for putting in swimming pools as a sort of a secondary way of avoiding chlorine to minimise algae and such. It's marketed at good old Bunnings under the brand Sunray Pool Salt. I'll put that once again below. Last time I bought a bag, about $8, 25 kilos. It will last you forever. I've never had a problem with it. It was described to me as being evaporated seawater minus all impurities, which seaweed, seagull feathers, old bottle tops. It's a reasonably uniform granule. It's not fine, it's not small, but it dissolves up beautifully. And I don't keep marine tanks anymore, but I would love to give this stuff a whirl in terms of making my own seawater. It's $8 or $9, and sometimes as low as $6 on special at Bunnings. For 25 kilos, that's going to make you a crap ton of seawater for a potential marine tank. In my case, I probably bought 4 bags in 12 years of this stuff, which is what I use for my brine shrimp. And sometimes if you want to salt bath a fish that you think is going to benefit from it, I chuck handfuls in the African cichlid sometimes. It hits a hell of a lot of benchmarks. Don't pay any attention to the bucket. That's not the primary bucket. It comes in a paper bag. Swimming pool section of Bunnings. Get on it. Okay, so I'm putting on a batch of brine. Here's my super sophisticated DIY hatcher, which constitutes a 3-litre apple juice bottle. My Sunray's apple juice bucket. Here's an old bottle. The only modification I made, I've tried to get the label off as best I can, and I've run a 25mm hole saw into the top to allow me to put air in. After a batch, I usually soak this in a bucket of chlorine water. I'm using a bit of bleach to constitute that for hygiene's sake. Rinsing it out is not massively important. I just get the worst of it out. Get our lid on there nice and tight. Get the worst of the water off the outside. At this stage, I like to get my hands nice and dry because I'm handling the cysts, which obviously we want to keep as dry as possible for hygienic storage. And at the moment, I'm looking at probably only needing to hatch out half a teaspoon. Stand up. So we'll go the short end of the teaspoon into our hole. Now, from memory, the brine shrimp can survive at very high salinities. 35 parts per thousand is seawater. Anything up to 100 parts per thousand, which in layman's terms is 35 parts per thousand is 35 grams of salt per litre. I'm going to be putting this up to about 2 litres. I want at least 70 grams. I've worked out this big old scoop is about 70 grams. one, and for good measure about another half. We get the worst of that in there, and then we gently turn on our water. It doesn't need to be dechlorinated, it doesn't need to be pre-warmed, it doesn't need to be pre-cooled. You'll read on the tin, it will tell you to let that stand for a time before you aerate it. It's not rocket science, guys. You can be pretty rough. Now, I've probably overfilled that a touch because by the time I'm aerating that will potentially bubble a little bit. The next important thing is the airstone. I hate the commercial little blue stones, the wooden stones. They all clog up over time. I don't use many airstones at all in my room. That little number there is an airstone from the Age of Aquariums website. They're made out of plastic. They click together in layers. You can pull them apart to clean the slime and shine off them. They don't produce an incredibly fine bubble, so your rate of oxygenation isn't great, but I'm not after that. I'm after turnover and turbulence. The black stem there is part of that's rigid, like the airstone's got a weight on it, so it's going to stay down anyway. But that is a dripper riser once again from Bunnings, from the garden department. It goes on your irrigation system, so it comes with the little nipple which will take the silicon airline straight from scratch, and then if you run that in under a bit of, or put it in some boiling water in a cup, soften it up, you can jam that stem from the airstone into that, and it will remain fixed for a good long time. That batch is now ready to go. I'm not sure how well the distribution shows of the cysts throughout. What you're going to notice when you come out tomorrow is this pink line around the top, which is this time tomorrow will be the remnants of any shell that has come off the cysts as they've hatched, or it's going to be some cysts that have actually been splashed up the sides from the aeration process. One of the things I've got in my favour, given that my entire room is heated at 24 degrees, I can sit this anywhere, on a shelf, on the floor, as long as it's got air to turn that over. The temperature is right. Obviously in the home environment you've probably got to look at different ways of doing that, and I believe, I've never done this, but I believe you can buy suction cups on most of the aquarium products online stores. And the way I'd be doing it is probably putting one of those in your bottle and actually placing the bottle into your tank. It's not going to look great, but it keeps that warm and will give you a good hatch. I'm going to put it on this specially made So there's my batch of brine bubbling away nicely. You want vigorous flow. It's not so much about the actual oxygenation requirement, it's just keeping those cysts exposed to absolutely as much water as possible to soften that outer shell and get those little guys hatching. It's now about 20 past 5. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock this will be good to go. We'll show you some the method I use to feed this tomorrow.
So here's our colony of brine shrimp. We're 24 hours on from when I put this on. I got held up a bit after work today, just getting out of the shed to do some feeding. If
can see that the sort of intensity of that colour has developed. That water looks good. The strong colour of pink is the hatchlings, the Norplii, and what we'll see hopefully is that the water itself should be nice and clear. Now my method of capturing is to turn the air off. I've got these good little clicker valves which stops the airflow to my bottle. And now we just come back in 5 minutes. This whole thing about using light to draw them to one part of the bottle, not my preferred method. What we're doing here is we're turning that air off. The baby brine are weak swimmers. They're going to go to the bottom of the bottle now, and more importantly, the shells from them hatching are going to float to the top because they're buoyant. We do want to avoid feeding those as they are indigestible to small fish and can cause losses. The method I'm going to show you is, I think, pretty bulletproof for avoiding that. If you're at all worried, there's products out there that you can spend as much money as you want on for brine shrimp, where they've actually coated the shells with a magnetic substance, and you can basically draw all the crud out by use of a magnet. Bit of a gimmick in my opinion, and just I don't think it's worth the extra expense. My preferred tool of choice for drawing up the baby brine and dispensing is a modified syringe. That's a 30 ml syringe. I'm lucky enough to work at a hospital, so it's easy for me to find second-hand syringes that I can clean up. I'm sure you can buy them at the local chemist. Once again, like my airstone earlier, that stem is a riser from a dripper irrigation system once again, minus the little barb. Once again, put it in a bit of boiling water to soften it, to be able to jam it onto your syringe. So it's now about 5 minutes since I turned off that air. We can see that the water is pretty good, pretty clear. That's to me a sign of a good hatch. It's hard to see the brine down in the neck of the bottle here. This is the sort of scum line where hopefully that is mostly hatched shell. There may well be some good cysts up there that sort of got splashed up with the aeration. When I'm finished tonight, I'll give that all a bit of a slosh and get it back into the thing, and hopefully they might hatch for me tomorrow. So here I am now 48 hours on from when I hatched. Unfortunately, the bit of footage I took last night didn't work, which was a disappointment. Culture's still looking pretty good 48 hours on. So we've now had about 4 or 5 minutes with no air flowing. We're certainly seeing a concentration down the bottom now of brine. Even 2 days on, this water is still relatively clear, which is a positive sign in terms of the hygiene of the batch. It's not as dense as it was this time yesterday when I took the footage that didn't pan out, but I still think we'll get another good dose to feed with now. Now it's a matter of placing our stem from our syringe down into that bottle carefully without sort of stirring up the bottom any more than we have to. Sometimes the airstone gets in the way. Just move that a little bit. I'm now down into the very bottom, the lid of the bottle, and we're just going to gently draw up a nice syringe full of brine. Now there's a decent batch in there still. This time yesterday was a much richer culture, but there's still a hell of a lot of good stuff in there for me to feed with. I'm now ready to make my way along the tanks to feed this off. I'm not putting this entire syringe full in one tank, it's way too much. I prefer normally to introduce the brine at the top like I've done there, which it gives you a second crack at eliminating any eggshell that you might have sucked up as part of the batch. I haven't fed these or loopy with it for a while, so they're still trying to figure it out, but they'll start to realise that the good stuff's about and get their guts full. I'm going to make my way along to the Hequi tank. Same deal, nice squirt, raining around a little bit to spread it out. It's always fun watching them kind of realise when it's about. It's a bit like that first seagull that arrives at the barbecue. One starts to feed and they usually all chime in. Now for the brevis, same deal, just giving that a good squirt, and we're away. I usually like to finish my syringe off in a tank with maybe even some larger fish that can benefit. This is my Descampsey colony. Even though they're quite large fish, they'll still get benefit from this shrimp. What I'm doing here too is I'm just giving that syringe a couple of rinses out now. It's amazing how much brine gets held in that black tube. You can kind of see everybody. I haven't done some of these fish for a while, so they kind of know something's about, and they're just thinking about how to access it. But these Descampsey will have a great time sifting this off the bottom when they all eventually settle. Now there's probably one more bit of equipment you should consider getting if you're going to do this seriously. It's marketed on the Age of Aquarium websites as a brine shrimp net. It's just a nice, fine, very fine mesh net that the brine shrimp cysts won't pass through, the baby brine. This culture is effectively done now after the 2 days, but that's not to say it doesn't have a bit still to offer. What I do at this time is carefully get my hose to the bottom of that bottle, start our siphon, and we're just going to drain this down to the point where this top layer remains. I don't want to risk getting any of that in here for the sake of trying to get the last percent or two. got to be a bit on your game because the taper on the bottle means the last bit's going to go a little bit faster. You might anticipate. I'm happy with that, so I'm taking my net away from the siphon. And you can see that there's a good slug of shrimp left in that net that's worth feeding to somebody. And today's lucky winner is going to be for the Scampsy and the baby albino bristlenose. Just going to give that net a good shake out in the tank. And there we go. Brine Shrimp 101. So folks, I hope that hasn't been too overwhelming for you. In terms of breaking down the setup costs, like there's going to be a bit of stuff to buy if you choose to go this route. And obviously the key player in all of this is your brine shrimp eggs. These, funnily enough, got very, very hard to come by 6 months ago when the worst of the COVID thing hit us, and international shipping and flights were brought to a standstill. I honestly haven't bought a tin of this myself for probably 2 years, and last time I did was 120 odd bucks. There has been a bit of creep in that department, but do your own research on this one. Whether you're an eBay person or an online store person, what I will say is buying a tin, it seems like a bit of a cost, but when we break the cost per batch down later on, there's no point buying those little packets. They're just too Mickey Mouse from my point of view. 454 grams in that tin, and as you saw earlier, we put 2 to 3 grams down in a batch. That gives you 150 batches out of that one. That's the most economical way to go, as far as I'm concerned. The salt, my bucket of salt there from Bunnings, as I mentioned earlier, about $8 to buy a bag of salt. You're probably going to need to buy a $12 bucket with a tight-fitting lid to store that in once you crack it open. So 20 odd bucks to get yourself set up for salt. The homemade hatcher, like everyone's got a Coke bottle or whatever, that doesn't count. That's a free hit. The syringe to draw the shrimp out of that, it might be a couple of bucks at a chemist. The black stem I'm using to access the bottom of the bottle, once again probably $1 or so at Bunnings. Very, very minimal cost there. You can try and go to Home Habitat and find yourself the turkey baster if you wish. I'm a syringe and an extension guy. The Airstone and Airline online stores, once again, I'm a big fan, as I mentioned earlier, of the plastic Airstone with the weighted bottom, which will stay down. If you double that up with the black stem, it's not going to go anywhere once it's in your hatcher. That's going to stay down the bottom where it needs to dry that air. $1.50 on Age of Aquariums, $3 for a pack of 2, $1 for air. To get set up and be hatching this out tomorrow, those bits and bobs are going to cost you about $200. As I mentioned during the video, I've got the free hit of, I don't have to try and heat that vessel of brine because I can do it anywhere in my room. If you're doing this for one tank in a house, it's going to be a bit more challenging. You might be able to put it on the back of your fridge if there's a space where that warm air goes up. I think the method of suspending it inside a tank with a syringe to hold it, suction cup to hold it, probably bears merit. And the method of lighting, I think I discussed that throughout the video. I'm not an advocate for using light to harvest. So that, you know, for $200 you can be set up to harvest brine shrimp. That probably sounds like a lot, doesn't it? At the end of the day, the other way I look at it, from the point of view of feeding all my fish in this room, is what it costs you to put on that batch. Once you own everything, what are the ongoing costs? Each time you put that batch on, all you're going to be using is a bit of water from your tap, 20 cents worth of salt. Let's say worst case scenario, you use 5 grams of cysts out of your 450 grams, you're using 1/90th of a tin, which might have cost you $1.50. Let's round it up to $1.50. So each batch might, at worst case, cost you $1.50, and you can feed your fish for about 3 days on that, guys. Like, one of the things, you probably noticed I haven't mentioned anything at all about growing these out to be brine shrimp. I've talked about baby brine. You don't need to feed baby brine shrimp. They are still loaded up with enough egg yolk to get them through the first 3 days of their growth as a brine shrimp. So that's no extra feeding. That's salt, brine shrimp, water, forget. 3 days. Over the course of this video, I fed them off over a couple of days because it was a smaller batch and I fed fairly heavily. You break it down like that, guys. It's you know, that tin, one batch every 3 days, 90 odd batches out of a tin. Let's say 100. You know, that's going to last you a year. That's a hell of a cheap way to feed your important fry. To condition your smaller brood stock, to just feed general grow out fish. At the end of the day, it's not that hard, guys. So give it a crack. Even if you don't buy a nice big tin of brine, I'm sure you can buy one of the small ones that will play. Everything else is pretty cheap in the grand scheme of things. This is a method I've kind of taught myself over the journey as a breeder with a fairly big scale operation. I guess it's not for everybody at that scale, but the methodology I think works, small or large. I hope you enjoyed, I hope you learned something. Good luck. Thanks.